President Trump has filed a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against the BBC over an edit of his speech on the 6th of January 2021 in a Panorama documentary. Mr. Trump has accused the BBC of defamation and of violating a trade practices law according to court documents filed in Florida, and asked for $5 billion in damages on each of the claims. Last month, the BBC apologised to President Trump but rejected his demands for compensation and disagreed there was any basis for his defamation claim. Here's our North America correspondent, Peter Bowes.
Donald Trump has gone through with his threat to sue the BBC. This is a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit seeking compensation for the US president sees as a deliberate attempt to misrepresent his message on January the 6th. The president is asking for a jury trial in Florida over his claim that the Panorama programme intentionally, maliciously and deceptively doctored the speech he made before his supporters forced their way into the US Capitol. Two sections of his address were edited together, out of sequence. The BBC acknowledged that it gave the mistaken impression that Mr. Trump had made a direct call for violent action. The corporation apologised but rejected Mr. Trump's initial demand for compensation. Hours before the court papers were officially filed, the president alerted the media from the Oval Office.
They actually put terrible words in my mouth having to do with January 6th that I didn't say. And the beautiful words that I said, right? The beautiful words, talking about patriotism and all of the good things that I said, they didn't say that, but they put terrible words. They actually have me speaking with words that I never said, and they got caught.
The lawsuit includes one count of defamation and one of violating Florida's trade practices law. Mr. Trump's legal team has asked for $5 billion in damages. The president's lawyers have argued that the BBC can be sued in Florida because the Panorama documentary was available to American audiences on its BritBox streaming service. A spokesman said the goal of the lawsuit was to hold the BBC accountable over what Mr. Trump sees as its reckless election interference. The controversy over the Panorama programme led to the resignations of two senior BBC executives, its head of news, Deborah Turness, and the Director General, Tim Davie. The corporation has not yet responded to the court filing. Peter Bowes, BBC News.
Well, let's now speak to David Banks, who's a media law consultant and journalist. Thank you for joining us on BBC News. So what happens next in this case?
Well, I think it's the first thing will be whether the Florida court, on the basis of President Trump's papers filed, will decide they actually have jurisdiction. The BBC will very probably be arguing that they don't. And I think this hinges on who saw it in Florida, how many people. Does the Florida court feel that sufficient audience was there and sufficient damage was done there for the court to have jurisdiction over the case?
To have jurisdiction over the case, just talk us through some of those points as to whether it would have jurisdiction over this case.
Well, I think firstly, they have to show that the BBC has sufficient presence there to be kind of actionable in Florida. Now, President Trump is arguing that the programme, although it wasn't available on iPlayer, it wasn't broadcast in Florida in the way that programmes are broadcast to people here in the UK. His lawyers are arguing that because it was available on BritBox, because some people could get it on VPN and some other streaming services, that was enough to make this a case that could be heard in a Florida court. Now, you know, the BBC will have data on its audiences and who saw it, how many people saw it, and they might be arguing that not insufficient people actually saw the programme for this to be a case that the Florida court should really be hearing, and that insufficient damage was done there for this to be a case that the Florida court should be considering.
How long could this go on for?
Well, that really does depend on the BBC's will to fight. It's apparent that President Trump is willing to go the distance, and he has with several media organisations. He's launched some successful, unsuccessful lawsuits, and they take months and months, even years, to actually come to fruition, and all that costs money. And so the BBC, no doubt, has to think about whether this is a fight they want to engage in over that sort of length of time, which will hugely expensive and hugely distracting as well.
Yes, because the BBC is a public corporation, so different from the other private media companies. Could that change how the BBC responds, do you think?
Well, absolutely. I think that a private company, their shareholders might have a view about, major shareholders might have a view about fighting very expensive legal battles, but they are more able to devote huge amounts of money to fighting legal actions. The BBC always has to think, I think it's unique, and it always has to think about its spending licence payers' money, and money that it would be far better spent on the programmes that it produces to broadcast. So it is in a different situation, and whether they want to engage in that. But they may well think this is a really important battle to be had about free speech and about the way in which politicians like President Trump relate to major broadcast organisations and the media generally.
Yes, a lot to look out for here. David Banks, thank you for joining us.